Welcome. Glad to have everybody joining us. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Zack Anderson, who is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at NatWest and currently located in London. And he's joining us today. And when I say us, I'm referring to my colleague, Raghu Iyengar, who is an esteemed professor here at the Wharton School. And he is also the director of the Wharton Customer Analytics group that we have here. I'm Dave Reibstein, and I'm a member of the marketing faculty here as well. But our attention today is turned to Zack. And Zack Anderson, as I said, is at NatWest. And Zack, just to get everybody familiar with who you are and what you do, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and also what it is you have been doing prior to that, because I think that's real interesting for us. Sure. And how long you've been in your current position.
Yeah, I'll start from the easy ones first. So I've only been a banker and lived in London and worked in this industry since February. So I joined NatWest on February 3rd, just about 6 weeks before lockdown, the first lockdown. Prior to that, I'd spent 13 years at Electronic Arts, the video game company in California. And my background by training is as a game theorist, actually. That's what I studied originally, and I've kind of, over time, the demand for micro versus macro has shifted back and forth. So I actually started out as a macroeconomist after school and worked in a few different places as a macroeconomist, and then ended up eventually at EA and spent time there. But kind of the nature of my career has been I've always turned whatever people hired me for didn't really matter. I always turned it into some sort of customer analytics using micro techniques to solve the problem, microeconomic techniques to solve the problem. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So thank you, Zack, again for joining. I know, as you mentioned, you joined NatWest in February. And so clearly the last few months have been, tumultuous, and that's an understatement. And so if you could just take us through your journey, what has been the 9 months like? Obviously coming from your electronic arts background, you were probably taking a lot of testing and learning from there and perhaps looking at what you could do, at NatWest. If you could take us through that journey, what you've learned, how are things going?
Yeah, it's been a really fun, despite COVID, it's actually been a really fun journey. Very different industries, obviously. Video games, not very regulated. And I like to say, if you think about the software and technology between a bank and a video game, nobody really wants their bank to operate like a video game. And nobody wants their video game to operate like a bank. So I'm trying to take lessons from each one of those and bring them forward. But it's really interesting. It's the banking space has in some ways a lot of similarities to video games in that it's a really customer focused space. And that's why I came to NatWest, was really because of the promise and the purpose that our new CEO laid out, which was to really create a bank that championed the potential of people and used the technologies and the banking space as a means to drive change and benefits for the society that it operates in. And so that was pretty exciting for me. It was, I love video games, and I do believe actually deeply in a lot of the positives of video games. And it's pretty fun actually making something that brings millions of people fun every day. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about banking is that you definitely have individual data. You know each of the names of each of your customers. You know when they're engaging with you.
Yep.
We know all of their transactions. How has that really affected basically your role and your capability of doing all the data analytics?
Yeah, I think the banks are interesting because they've obviously always had transaction data.
Mm-hmm.
But as people have gone online more and more, and banking's done digitally, now they've started to gather interaction data, and that's where the similarity between gaming and banking really exists. Is that I spent a number of years building up really detailed interaction data with how people interact with our apps and our marketing and our games at EA. That's what I've really brought over here, is to start to build out and develop a set of tools and underlying infrastructure, and then also just analytical capabilities to study how people interact with our apps and try to make them better.
So could you elaborate on that just a little bit and let us know, when you say interaction, my first thought was interacting with each other. No, yeah. It's interaction with your apps. And what are you referring to, and what in particular are you?
Yeah, I mean, the banking apps, unlike games, don't have social interaction as much as video games do. But for the bank, it's primarily watching how people interact with us, but also trying to interact with our apps. So, basic, start at the basic. How much do people use the app, and what do they use it for? So our banking app, our retail banking app, has about 9 or 10 million customers in it, and on a regular basis. And those customers, going through and looking at the behavioral data of what they're doing, and then also I think connecting that with their transactions, and then trying to figure out really how we could help them get through this crisis has been a really fascinating exercise. So one of the first things that we did was utilize our data around incoming deposits and figure out who were NHS workers here in the UK, and set up a special line, and then contact them either both digitally and through other means to say, hey, we have a mechanism for you. We know you're on the front lines, you're working every day. You might not want to come into the branch. What can we do to help you? And we made dedicated people available to them. And then we also had some special services that we provided them. Then we did, quickly following that, we actually did the same thing with in the UK, we had a pretty strong isolation order for 70 plus customers. And there we actually knew that, a lot of them weren't on the app. So what we did was have our bankers use some video capabilities like we're using now, that we've all become familiar with, but in March, not everybody was used to doing. And we had our bankers that were at home reach out to the vulnerable population, older population that was self-isolated, and figure out what they needed. And sometimes that meant they took them cash cards with money on them so that they could spend, or in a few cases, just talk to them. And that was but what we did from a data and analytics perspective is actually figure out, go through all of our records, figure out who is there, who is vulnerable, who is probably self-isolating, and look at their behaviors, see if they were normally, branch customers that came in every week and brought a check or cashed a check or something like that, and then figured out how we could serve them. And so that was a pretty fun project. We did that in the first, not fun because it's a tough situation, but fun for me to see the power of how a bank could operate in a digital age, be a relationship bank, but really in this digital age. So really fun, I think, way to show the purpose. And then since then, we've been continuing to drive down into our data to try to figure out how we could help people, whether that's businesses or our customers. We have a pretty strong share of our business market, of the commercial market here in the UK. And so we've done a lot of work to help make sure that, for example, the government loan schemes got executed, and that everybody could get access to cash to keep their businesses afloat. And even there, we looked at the behavior in those journeys of applying for the government loan schemes, and saw who was falling out or who got caught, and then built interventions to go back and help them get through, so that we could try to get everybody the cash that they needed.
Wow, this is a very nice example, Jack. Especially kind of coming customer journey together with analytics to understand, where might be some ways which, in this case, NatWest can help customers along. But of course, all of this requires investments in analytics, investments in underlying technology, investments in people. Yeah. And so clearly, when you joined NatWest, of course, there were some great people in there. But what have been some of the investments, perhaps in any of these that you've done in the last few months to make sure that you can deliver at the front end?
Yeah, I mean, so when I showed up, NatWest had already made quite a few investments in its core underlying technology. For one, it has a really powerful system of connecting all of its internally owned channels through a decisioning engine, and that allows them to, decide to push if we want to contact a customer, like in the case of the NHS workers, the decisioning engine actually pushes whether that's an email or an in-app banner ad. Basically, it's not really an ad, but banner. Or to an online space, and so we've been able to utilize that, and that we didn't have to invest in. In fact, NatWest has been investing in it for a long time. We pushed it a little bit further on the commercial side. It hadn't been as heavily used on the commercial side, but we got that implemented pretty quickly, especially in the case of helping drive through the government loan schemes. I have a pretty large team at NatWest, so they already had invested pretty well in building up that team. It's a little over 1,000 people in terms of engineering and data science and analytics. So it's a big structure, but we're continuing to invest. We're continuing to try to connect up as many of the channels and online journeys as we possibly can. So there's banks, as I've come to understand, banks have grown through acquisition and integrations over time, and so there are pieces that are a little bit set apart, a little bit siloed, and so we've been doing a lot of work this year to make sure that we bring down the walls between the silos and connect the data. As you know, we talk about all the time. My view is that the data is like customers. If you have it divided up, then it's going to be really hard to deliver a great customer experience. And so for me, that was one of the first things, was to try to find the silos that existed and start to bring the pieces together.
Zack, I'm really curious. In 2008, in the recession that we had in 2008, banking and financial institutions were at the epicenter.
Yeah. The
recession that we're having now is actually a health, based recession. I'm curious, and I think it'd be good for our audience to hear, how is it that this pandemic and its accompanying recession has affected banking, and in particular NatWest?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably, for obvious reasons, stay away from our own financials, but it's in the UK, this is the worst recession in 300 years. And that's really affecting our customers. And then, the government loan schemes has put a really big strain on even the operations of our bank. So we've, in some of our franchises, have stopped taking customers just because we're servicing the customers that we have at maximum rate, especially with the loan schemes. And so that's been a pretty big decision when we decided we weren't going to let anybody else in, and that we had to service our customers first. So that's pretty big strains on a bank. Obviously, like any other going business, wants to grow and wants to acquire new customers, and so we've had to close the door on some of that for a little while we service the customers we had. And then obviously, the whole industry has the economies that all banks exist in are under strain and are going to change things like loan losses and default rates for years ahead. So that's really shifting the economics behind banking itself. And then on top of that, extremely low rates. And that also means less margin for banks because they don't get any gain off of their savings accounts and the loans that they turn on those. So, that it's meant pretty tough economics for the whole industry. And then the question is, what do you do about that? And I think you're seeing different banks around the world take different strategies with that. We've been pretty aggressive to try to take our role as one of the main high street banks in the UK as, you know, helping to prop up the economy, helping to deliver the government loans, and to help our customers at a really individual level, using the data that we have to try to help them out and figure out what we can do to keep their businesses open or afloat, even if they're not open, and keep our personal customers, you know, engaged and active, whether that's giving loan holidays or, you know, calling them on the phone.
And,
Zack,
and
go ahead.
have there been any banks that have gone out of business or on the brink of going out of business?
There are certainly banks that are I think struggling and are saying they're struggling. So I probably won't comment on that too much either.
Okay.
So Zack, you know,
we're in a nice financial position, so we're well capitalized.
You know, going back to some of the things that, you know, we've had the privilege, we at Customer Analytics at Wharton have had the privilege of, you know, kind of interacting with you over the years. And one of the things that you repeatedly talked about when you come here to Wharton and talked about the analytics side of things is that sometimes you need a champion within the company to push analytics through, because, you know, it takes some time to see the returns.
Yeah.
So during this, you know, the last few months, has it been an easier sell, so to speak, within the company to showcase the power of analytics, especially as you're tracking customer journeys and kind of showcasing all the investments that they had perhaps done before you came in are actually bearing fruit?
It's hard for me to evaluate easier or not easier given the short time that I've been here, but I think that I've been really happy with coming in from the outside. You never know really whether management and your colleagues are going to value what, you know, why you're showing up and the work that you're going to do. And I'd say I've been really pleased to find the support from the whole executive committee and the board at NatWest. And you're right. I think, you know, I think the combination of the bank's purpose and this crisis and data and analytics has made a pretty unique opportunity to showcase what's possible. And so that's, you know, there's certainly lots of good examples. So I think that to me, it feels like we're getting there faster than, say, I did when we were first starting the journey at EA. And I think the continued investment of the bank going forward in this is really, you know, has real promise. But, you know, some of that I knew before the crisis happened also. Obviously, when you're looking for a job, you want to make sure that your new job has the benefit of being aligned with company strategy and aligned with the executive, and especially when a new CEO is coming in. So, so I kind of knew all those things were there before I showed up. But yeah, there's some new. I mean, I have to say, I'm really proud of what the bank's done and what the data and analytics team's done over this period. It's pretty astounding. Really great examples of living a purpose. You know, I mean, I think we all can be a little bit skeptical of purpose, you know, sometimes, and values, and whether they're just, you know, some sort of value washing. But to see the bank really live up to that purpose in an everyday way. You know, I mean, even with our colleagues, the bank sent our colleagues, the other employees, home a week before lockdown actually happened here, because we determined that there just wasn't a need to have, you know, people in the office, and we could see the crisis coming, and so they sent people home. And you know, for us, with people in branches and touching money and all of the kind of, you know, frontline activity, that probably saved people's lives.
Yeah.
You know, it was a hard thing to send 70,000 employees home. Not a trivial logistic exercise. But that actually saved people's lives, which is pretty interesting. And I think the board and the executive team did that, you know, before even the country did, which is a pretty bold move.
So Zack, I'm going to shift gears for a second here. You know very well that both Raghu and I are marketing professors, and I'm interested in what you do with your customer analytics that you do. In terms of sort of informing the marketing side of the bank, and in particular, how changes have been made or have been needed in marketing spending. And so what can you tell us about how the marketing spending has been affected by the pandemic, and some of how you've helped in informing on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, as I said before, in some of our franchises, we stopped taking customers. So we decreased our spend on those. No reason to do acquisition spend if you aren't going to open the door to them.
Right.
So definitely a reduction in that. But what we turned a lot of our marketing power towards was guiding people. So, helping. What we saw was a big rise in utilization of our apps by our customers. So they were going online to do their banking, which makes sense when you can't go into a branch. But some of them were struggling. So, we created a lot of marketing assets, both at the kind of direct one-to-one way of marketing, but also even with some television ads that started to show people how to get into the app, where to go to download them, and what they could do in them. So we were really building an information campaign around how to bank with us even while the branches were closed. And so we had to shift that quite a bit. And we also had to build some journeys and some marketing assets that just helped people, educate people about COVID, educate them about the government loan schemes here in the UK, educate them about fraud. I mean, that was there's a lot of fraud going on right now. And so we had to build new creatives and new ways of contacting people about the potential for fraud, and actually even change some of our practices within the bank, and then inform people in short order without talking to them directly about some of those new practices. So there's a lot of, if you think of marketing as TV ads and billboards, we're probably not doing hardly as much of that as we did before.
Right.
But if you think about marketing as educating your customers on how to use your products and what products are right for them in the right moment, we've done a lot of that. So it's been a pretty big shift, I would say, in terms of how we operate right now. But and I think it's been good. It'll be very interesting to see how many of those customers ever go back to walking down to the branch every day. I think a lot of them will engage with our apps and our online tools because it's frankly easier and it's 24/7. So I think there'll be my suspicion is that there's going to be a pretty big shift in terms of how people engage with banks after this. Well, some will go back, but I think the majority of people that have gone online with this won't go back.
Thank you for mentioning that, Zach. One of my questions, which I was going to ask you, was, what things do you think would be sticky, and what things do you think some of the investments that you've done right now might kind of bubble up again after the pandemic is done and we come back to some normalcy? Are there some changes in behavior that you will find kind of reverting back?
Yeah, I mean, and we saw a little of this in the UK, but so I think online banking will have grown at a level that we've never seen, and will probably not go back to the level that it was at before. And I think of the majority of people that have come online. The thing that I think has been interesting to watch and is a little less certain is how how much cash is used or not used. So it's another really interesting fact, which drives a lot of logistics and activity in banks, obviously, and in retail shops. And so we've definitely seen cash waver up and down as the lockdowns have come up and down here in the UK. And so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I think I was a little bit surprised when the restrictions opened up in the UK during the summer. We saw cash bounce back a little more than I personally would have expected, because it's so easy if you've already switched over. But I think there's still big parts of the economy that are cash economies, and as people started to venture back outside, they started using cash again. So that's been a kind of interesting thing to watch, and I think it'll be really. That one I'm less sure of saying. I'm pretty sure a big portion of the people that have gone online, either for banking or buying from Amazon or wherever, are going to stick with that. But I think that some of the basics of things like, there's a portion of the population that uses cash every day. And I think that might continue at higher rates than maybe we would have expected as we saw the transition go down in lockdown, but then kind of come back up. So we'll see.
Yeah, so I find that very interesting, and it makes sense. So I appreciate you commenting on that. We're about to run out of time, but there's a theme that has evolved from several of our previous interviews that I thought I would ask you about.
Sure.
Which is the role of brand during this period. Many people think, well, with people going online, brand plays less of a role, but what we've also been hearing is the importance of brand. And I don't know if you have any sense of how important the brand is or has become, and whether or not that has shifted at all. And again, you've had a short tenure there in NatWest, but maybe you have a sense of that.
I mean, my sense is that the bank has responded pretty well, and that's supported our brand image and been able to boost some of the satisfaction of our customers through that support. Those highly salient moments when you're in crisis or you need to do something and the world's different than you expected. When any company shows up and helps you accomplish what you need, that's a pretty good moment for a company to stand up and help a customer. And so I think the bank's done a nice job, a really nice job of that. I think your question about is brand, I'm learning still, I'll have to admit, about brand in the banking space. It's an interesting situation. It's very different than the brand in, say, the video game space. In video game, brands are marks of quality and of so they're markers of what what the experience is that you're gonna get. I think in banking, it's more of a trust relationship, and so I think the trust relationship moves a little slower. So we'll see how that evolves over time. I like to tell people about, at EA, if you built a game and people didn't like it, they were gone the next day. Banking's a little stickier than that, in both directions probably. And so we'll see what the long-term effect is on the brand, on all the brands from this experience. So.
Yeah, actually, my personal belief, Zach, is that brands for financial services are more important than for many other products. Yeah. In part because, in one sense, a bank is a commodity. And if you look at it, banks spend a fair amount of money on trying to build their brand. Yeah. And so I was curious as to how it might have changed during this particular period. But I think your comments were very, very appropriate. We've taken enough of your time and really appreciate all that you have shared with us. So on behalf of the Wharton School and Raghu and I, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and good luck going forward. And let's get healthy and move forward. So thank you very much, Zach.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great to talk, and maybe we can talk again in another year after I've been here 2 years. I'll be able to answer some more of your questions. So.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Take care.
For your time. Take care. Bye-bye.